This podcast was recorded at 8 a.m. on 19 April, Jakarta time. Things may have changed by the time you hear this. Enjoy the show.
This is Reformasi Dispatch. I'm Jeff Hutton.
And I'm Kevin O'Rourke from Reformasi Weekly.
Well, it's Ramadan. What are you doing have you ever, Mark, I've always wondered, I've been 8 years in Jakarta, 9 years, actually, next month, how time flies. I've always sort of wondered if I could work up the courage and the fortitude, the intestinal fortitude to observe Ramadan, because I think it can be a cleansing sort of experience. I don't know if I think you have at one point.
Yeah, I've done it in the past, in order to for solidarity with the household. The big secret about Ramadan that you don't hear a lot about, fasting's not really all that hard. If you've ever skipped lunch, it's kind of the same. It's more difficult than merely skipping lunch, but not a lot more difficult.
What's the hardest part? I mean, there's got to be some difficult parts. It looks like the late afternoon is the trickiest part.
Well, it's the headaches you get from caffeine withdrawal from not having had a cup of coffee. That's by far the hardest part. But maybe that's just me.
Oh, no. So I think I'm afraid to say that it's probably the caffeine withdrawal. Sitting here at 7:30 in the morning on a Monday, but I've got my coffee here. And I look at it going, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, moving on. We got a great show, and we're going to have an interview with Tiza Mafira. She's an environmentalist, former lawyer. I'm sure she's probably still an environmental lawyer. And she's been involved in a documentary that's coming out this week, April 22nd, called Pulau Plastik, Plastic Island.
Yeah.
It's about ocean waste. I'm really looking forward to it.
Right. I'm really looking forward to speaking with her. I'm thrilled that she was willing to join our podcast. I've heard her discuss the topic before, and she really is hugely important and kind of mind-blowing in the scope and the consequences of it. So
if you haven't done so, go to YouTube, check out the trailer, Pulau Plastik, Pulau, P-U-L-A-U, Plastik, P-L-A-S-T-I-K. I'm sorry for my accent. Plastic Island. Check it out. You will want to see it. On the show today, we're going to have a talk about Russians and the PKB. That's Gus Dur's old party. VakNus, the Vaccine Nusantara. MPR Speaker's gun club. Indonesia gets a new gun club. And first, because it is the season, I think we need to talk about mudik, or the lack of it.
Yeah, this is the annual exodus from the cities nationwide as temporary residents in the cities go back to their rural communities, oftentimes bringing savings that they carry back to help their families. And it involves the movement of tens of millions of people on the roads and ships and planes and everything. It's
a little bit like, I always imagine it a little bit like keeping the ocean back with a broom. If you want to keep, people in the big cities, and by big cities, I mean, it's mainly Jakarta, right? How would you do that? And would the authorities be in a better position this year than they were last year?
Yeah, they're definitely in a much better position this year for a few reasons. One, everybody's taking it way more seriously now than anybody did a year ago. Plus, there's a lot more tools at their disposal now in terms of screening technologies. PCR testing is more widespread, but rapid antigen tests are available now. And then they've also got this, the Genos breathalyzer that we've talked about. And then the third thing is that there's been a lot of vaccinations administered to healthcare workers. And about, I want to say 25 or 30% of frontline workers now are fully vaccinated. And a lot of those are the ones who are going to be involved in managing this mudik exodus hands-on.
As someone who has done a little bit of travel, not very much, but a little bit of travel in the country, look, authorities, they check your papers. They go through it. They scan that QR code, and if you don't have they send. I've actually, so I slipped through the cracks at one point, not knowing. I went to the Bandung to report on a story, and I go to the Kereta Api, to the train station there, and like, where are your papers? What papers? What? No, you can't. What? You're born under a rock? You're not getting on this train. So, yeah. And I think now there's going to be some roadblocks. There are going to be checkpoints on the toll roads.
Yeah. So, it's really going to be interesting to watch how effective this prohibition on traveling is, or the safeguards on traveling without a negative test result. So the thing is that there's just a million back lanes and alleys and rural streets that people can use, especially on motorbikes, to evade the checkpoints, I think. So, yeah, there's going to be massively enhanced mobility one way or the other, even with a strong prohibition. And the higher mobility is going to fuel more transmissions because the vaccinations administered are good, but it's still only about 3% of the national target of 180 million. So Indonesia is susceptible to another wave for sure. And that's really the concern right now.
Do you recall what the influx of infections were last year, mudik last year when they tried to ban it?
They increased by about 30 or 50%, within the next few weeks. Yeah, it was a big jump up. That's actually what kicked it off was the mudik, because before that, cases had been imperceptibly low. This year, there's also a risk of complacency because lots of times you see in press reporting it being said that cases are low or cases are declining. When you look at the data for almost a full month now, cases have not been declining. They've been very much on a plateau. So there's real risk of resuming momentum there.
Right. Okay. We'll watch this space. Over at PKB, they are they're reconsidering the leadership. What's happening there? And it's Yeni Wahid in the driver in the pole position to take the leadership.
Right. Well, so the National Awakening Party, or PKB, is the affiliate of the largest Islamic organization, Nahdlatul Ulama, which is a moderate religious organization that respects pluralism. And this is one of the pillars of Widodo's pro-government alliance. It is, I think, the third largest party in his alliance after PDIP and Golkar, or fourth if you count Gerindra as being pro-Widodo. And Muhaimin Iskandar has been the chair since 2005. So this is one of those parties where it really doesn't have internal democracy because it's just dominated by a single personality. And he's very much intent on staying in power and, in fact, also trying to become simultaneously chair of NU, which would then make him a very obvious candidate for vice president in 2024. He's the type of person who he's never disguised his political ambitions. He's very open about wanting higher office. And he took office in PKB in 2005 amid an extremely fraught internal rift between two factions, his versus that of the Wahid family of former President Abdurrahman Wahid, Gustur, the late president. So his daughter, Yeni Wahid, lost out in that battle. And so she's still around and available to head an insurrectionist movement within the party. But it's unclear to me that detractors of Iskandar really have enough support. Yeah, so the thing is that in these in internal party battles, triggering an extraordinary Congress takes a certain amount of regional chapters passing a threshold, an extraordinary Congress. And there's reports that there's a fair number in PKB that want that, but there's no proof. And even if those reports are true, they're still not at the threshold yet. So I don't think Iskandar is really in jeopardy.
And so do you think Yeni is actually gunning for the job? Does she have higher ambitions for higher office?
Yes. She was definitely sorely aggrieved by having lost that battle back in 05-06. So she would take it up at a heartbeat, I'm sure.
Hey, podcast listeners, if you made it this far, then why not subscribe and rate us? It helps. And for a free trial of the Reformasi Weekly newsletter, go to reformasi.info. Staying with politics, Indonesia is getting a gun club.
Yeah. So, yeah, and it's probably not good news.
No.
This is a gun club founded and headed by Bambang Soesatyo. So Bambang's Bang Bang Club, you could say, I guess, if you wanted to.
If we wanted to, we're going to keep that. And I think we've got a title for the episode.
No,
maybe not.
But he's the Speaker of the MPR, the People's Consultative Assembly, which is the combined legislature consisting of Parliament with 575 members, plus also the Regional Representatives Assembly, which has no power. It's the upper house. So it's a ceremonial role that he possesses, but one thing that he's advocated is doing away with direct elections for president and instead having presidents elected in the MPR, which he heads, I guess, thinking that maybe he would be a leading candidate in that case. And that's how it was done in the Soeharto era. He himself also comes from Pemuda Pancasila. So that's he's had a career in there. And another Pemuda Pancasila figure, Yoris Riwai, is also in this gun club, which is called Periksa.
Periksa. That's Indonesian for test?
Yeah, it's Indonesian for inspect.
Inspect. Right. It's coming up in my Indonesian classes a lot during COVID.
Yeah, and it's one of those very tortured acronyms that, they really had to stretch it and, wriggle around in order to come out with Periksa, because they're ostensibly claiming that the purpose of the club is to help police enforce permits for gun owners, make sure gun owners all have permits, which is actually the last thing this club really cares about, I'm sure. There's a lot of other things before that.
Oh, wait, does Indonesia have a gun culture? I mean, I know it has had a history of, given Indonesia's history, I would have thought that the last thing the political leaders would want is to inculcate a gun culture.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, anybody who's ever spent time in Indonesia, especially anybody who's come from America, I think probably really appreciates the fact that it's incredibly safe. And, there's a lot of reasons for that. But one is the fact that it is extremely difficult to obtain a handgun. You look at these very hardened, resourceful terrorists, even they have huge difficulty procuring handguns for their attacks. There is a gun culture. It's just an extremely elite circle. And in the Soeharto era, it was literally just the inner circle of Soeharto, his offspring and their buddies. That was the Soeharto era gun club. It was called Perbakin. And that's still around. So I think Bambang Soesatyo recognizes that group is weak because the Soeharto family seems to be on the defensive and they're really a shadow of their former selves right now politically.
Is this guy Bambang, was he involved in that? I seem to recall now a push right in the early years of the Widodo presidency. They wanted to abolish direct elections in local governments. So no more elections for Bupati and mayor.
Yeah, that's definitely part of his agenda for sure. Yeah, he's definitely got anti-democratic ambitions. Yeah, so Bambang Soesatyo is one of the chief risk factors in Indonesia's political outlook. Also because he was the number 2 candidate for chair of the Golkar party in 2019. So yeah, he came close to being a major player, and he'll probably make a run for that again in future. Or he could expand this gun club into a political party.
You were talking about the Soehartos there, and I have noticed some reporting that the Soehartos have lost Taman Mini. That just popped to mind. There's an opportunity maybe to talk about that. And Taman Mini has always belonged to the government, but the rights to operate it, he says in air quotes, was in the hands of the foundation that was run by the Soeharto. And the FARC is in arrears, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and losing money hand over fist. And it's a massive tract of land in East Jakarta. How significant is this loss of the operation of the park? It kind of seems like the foundation may have been a little bit of a slush fund if it's been so badly run.
Yeah, basically. So Soeharto back in the mid-1970s gave the concession to operate this new national theme park to the First Lady's foundation, Harapan Kita. And to this day, there's at least 3 or 4 Soeharto family members on the board of Harapan Kita. And Taman Mini is its main operating unit. They do have a couple of hospitals also and an office building. But Taman Mini is a national landmark. It's a theme park that celebrates diversity and beauty and ethnicities of Indonesia. It has multiple different museums. There's a lot of different ministries and agencies that are involved in managing different parts of the park. So it's an agglomeration of things. But the overall umbrella is Harapan Kita. And they have never contributed any revenue to the government, even though the government is the owner of the land and the owner of the park. So whatever it is they're doing, they're pocketing any profits. And there should be a lot of profits because this thing is visited by huge numbers of people year after year. And it is a great site. It's good, but it's not an international class kind of venue, and it could be. The land itself is just a choice piece of real estate. It's 150 hectares in an area in the 1970s that was on the outskirts. It was well outside central Jakarta. Nowadays, it's right smack in the middle of Jakarta. So it's got huge potential. So it's being transferred to the government, and they'll run it through a state-owned tourism company from now on.
What does that say about the standing of the Soehartos?
Yeah, it says a lot. I mean, for the fact that the Widodo administration is willing to just literally grab this choice thing away from the bulk of the Soeharto family shows that the Soeharto family is really weak. And it implies that Widodo and his people around him are fed up with the Soeharto family constantly agitating in politics, because there's been a few phases now where several Soeharto family members have been supporting opposition parties.
I was having a look through the vault, the reporting at around the time of the transition to democracy, Reformasi. Came across the Time cover story of the corruption of the Soehartos. If anyone hasn't read it, you should go back to it. It's quite the blast past. The article, the cover story, was just a reminder of the extent of the graft, just how venal they were and how rapacious and kleptocratic. It was just extraordinary what Indonesia had suffered at their hands.
Yeah, well, it was a very elaborate patronage-based political system where everything was geared towards generating abnormal profits through monopolies or concessions to produce economic rents, which those in power could recycle as largesse to buy loyalty from followers. And so there was a substantial percentage of the population that benefited from that largesse, whether it's 5%, 10%, 15% maybe. But then a lot of other people were really suffering, yeah.
In that vein, overwrought sense of entitlement, on to VakNus. Former Minister Terawan and would-be ambassador to Spain is beating the drum for this American vaccine that's been dressed up in the merah putih. He won't let it go.
Yeah, this is a vaccine we've talked about before. It's not the red and white vaccine or the vaccine merah putih, which is the national vaccine being developed at home by Indonesia's own Eichmann Institute. Instead, this is called VakNus, which stands for Vaccine Nusantara, which makes it sound like it's a national vaccine because Nusantara is basically almost eponymous with the word Indonesia. So it's being portrayed as a national vaccine, but it's not at all, because all aspects of this product come from iVita, which is a biomedical startup that's 5 years old in California.
The vaccine is this multi-step process of taking plasma and then basically tailoring a treatment or an inoculation for you. It seems like it's got a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, Hans Kiersted is the iVita founder, Canadian, and he's a stem cell expert. So he's been highly successful, and he's been focused on using stem cell methodologies to treat cancer, using with a vaccine approach. So basically, he's trying to find a stem cell based cancer vaccine. Then COVID cropped up, and he's trying to apply the same methodology to COVID. So they came to Indonesia to do a phase 1 trial with 27 participants. And there's two different sets information about how that worked. The iVita on its website says that nobody experienced any serious adverse consequences, and the phase 1 trial succeeded. Penny Lukito the chair of the Food and Drug Oversight Agency of Indonesia, BPOM, says in a parliament hearing that the phase 1 trial was a disaster and that 70% of participants had side effects, including multiple participants who had serious blood disorders. So, and she also faulted these vaccine developers for not being transparent and forthright. And she listed a whole bunch of other problems with this phase 1 trial in terms of she claimed that people involved had already had COVID antibodies before taking part in the trial, so they shouldn't have been eligible. She said that their standards of manufacturing and clinical processes are weak. So, and then she also disputes whether this whole thing is appropriate for Indonesia in the first place, because it's a very complicated process for administering the vaccine. As you mentioned, basically they draw a basic blood sample from a person, and then they take that serum and pull out the autologous cells or the dendritic cells and treat that with a recombinant spike protein from SARS coronavirus, and then let that kind of work for 7 or 8 days and then re-inject it back into the same person from whom it came. So it's supposedly a personalized vaccine, but it involves a lot of coordination in terms of the timing and the storage and the labeling and the scheduling of the person to come back at just the right time to be re-injected. So Penny Lukito says this is not the vaccine for Indonesia. We shouldn't be wasting our time with it. And she refused. She refused permission for a stage 2 clinical trial. However, a stage 2 trial is taking place nonetheless in the Gatot Subroto Army Hospital, headed by Terawan Putranto, the former health minister, who himself is a retired 3-star general and himself formerly headed Gatot Subroto Army Hospital. This effort used to have also the Karyadi Hospital in Semarang, affiliated with Diponegoro University, a prestigious school. They're no longer part of it with no explanation. So it's all very suspect and weird. And then meanwhile, they've got a whole bunch of politicians taking part in the phase 2 trial.
So if this has been hit on the head by the head of Indonesia's version of the FDA, why is it even still considered a thing?
Well, I think that I'm guessing here. I think that the reason is that it's widely perceived that Terawan Putranto has a very close personal rapport with Joko Widodo, the president, and so therefore he can get away with it. And so what's really striking is that none of the other figures besides Penny Lukito, who should be saying something, are saying anything. The health minister is mum. The army chief, who's ultimately in charge of this hospital where this is happening, is mum, not saying anything. And so too with the COVID task force personnel. So it's all very ominous, because this could go wrong in a lot of ways.
Well, right. I mean, if this goes pear-shaped, and it looks like it already has, what does this do for confidence in Indonesia's broader vaccination effort?
Yeah, it just creates vaccine skepticism one way or another, because one scenario is that they foist a bad product on the population that makes vast numbers of people sick and doesn't work. Another possibility is that this Ivita product is a wonder drug, which is the cure for humanity, but because they did a dodgy trial, nobody believes it. And so that would hold it back. And then, but the larger, more likely scenario is that all this controversy just weakens the credibility of Lukito as BPOM chair and creates more skepticism about vaccines in general. So it's something that I think is helping Terawan, who's trying to rehabilitate his image after having been sacked as health minister finally in December. But other than that, it's not really helping anybody, I don't think.
And presumably the army wants to be seen as the guardian of the nation. They want to be doing some Hail Mary pass as well.
Yeah, well, there's an opportunity there for somebody to come out with a miracle cure for COVID that brings life back to normal. And I think there's plenty of leaders within the ranks of the army who want to seize that opportunity if it's within reach. And there's a huge amount of positive sentiment within the political elite for Terawan. He's been extremely effective at lobbying elites behind him, so they're championing him. He's supposed to go to Madrid as ambassador, as you mentioned. I don't know when that's going to happen, but
meanwhile, I still wait for my Sinovac. I'd be happy with that. I'm happy with any vaccine. I feel a story coming on. Anyway, coming up, Tiza Mafira. Tiza, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, pleasure, and thanks for having me.
I have been a reporter in Indonesia since, we're going on 9 years now. And the issue of disposable plastic, single-use plastic, has always it's always sort of struggled to reach a sort of critical mass in the minds of the public. We've had the bans on shopping bags, but I hate to tell you, I could go downstairs in the basement of my apartment building and I can get takeaway from the warung, including in a styrofoam container. It seems to be we're making a step forward and staying there and making a couple steps back a little later. Just as an issue, where does it sit in the popular psyche?
One step forward, two steps backwards is exactly how I feel the movement has been going for the past 8 years that I've been focusing on this issue. But what it does mean is that there is some progress as well, albeit slow. And the key thing that we always like to emphasize is that it really isn't the public's fault. It isn't the fault of average consumers and average individuals. Because the system is a system that still provides these single-use plastics for free, or actually for a very, very small monetary amount. Now, the successes that have occurred, for example, with plastic bags, is in supermarkets and modern stores. You will see that it hasn't worked as well in traditional markets, in the warungs, in the restaurants. It hasn't worked as well in all the informal type of establishments, and it hasn't worked as well on online platforms. The reason for that is because the first phase of regulations that we're now seeing across Indonesia is specifically targeted towards supermarkets and modern stores, simply because it's easier. They are more established. They've started trials years in advance, and they're generally more prepared when the regulations started coming out. So now, my organization has dealt with this for years. Now we're starting to move into, okay, now we've had success with modern stores. How do we replicate this success with the more traditional stores?
And how receptive are they? The warungs, the go food types, the people that are selling food out of their kitchens. What's the receptivity there?
There was a lot of resistance in the beginning because plastic is so cheap, and it costs them nothing to provide consumers this for free. One of our first arguments to the traditional markets, we have piloted the first plastic-free traditional market starting here in Jakarta, and starting with plastic bags. The first things that we said to them was, listen, you're now providing plastic bags for free to your customers. How much do you pay for that? And a vendor would say something like 500,000 rupiah per month, 600,000 rupiah per month. So after we started the trial, we went back and said, what do you think? And they said, we don't have to spend this money anymore. We actually had some savings. Great. So we thought problem solved, right? Because now they see the economic value of doing this. But a few months afterwards, after the program, we came back and then there was another lag. They were saying, because some of our customers didn't carry bags and it was just such a hassle for us to, and then, some of our customers.
Making it stick, right?
Yeah, exactly. So making it stick has been a challenge.
Yeah, I heard you speak at a World Bank presentation a couple of years ago discussing marine-borne plastic waste. So in your role, you focus on plastic waste globally? Terrestrial and marine and everything?
I focus on reduction of single-use plastics from the point of distribution to the consumer. So less on the upstream manufacturing point, more on distribution to consumers. And sometimes we get sometimes there's an impression that we're working on like consumer education type of activities, whereas that's correct, but we don't believe that individuals should be responsible for this issue. There has to be consumer behavior change, but it has to be achieved by giving consumers the choice to act appropriately. And that means regulation at the retailer
I like this.
side. Yeah. Regulation, that means policy, basically.
Right.
And that's what we've been focusing on for the past 8 years.
Because a lot of like the businesses are getting away with making it the consumer's fault. Like if you only took the extra step to recycle, it won't have a problem. You need to do the work. And we're not the problem. Am I right in thinking that the evidence shows that when government steps in with regulation, then things get done?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And even regulations that don't get, when we say, oh, regulation will solve the problem, there's always this voice that says, only if it's enforced, right? Which is true. But we found even that with weak enforcement, for cities that don't necessarily have strong law enforcement, we find that still there's a success rate that's quite significant. For the cities that we've actually worked with and that we've collaborated with and provided technical assistance to, our recent surveys have found that the success rate varies for cities that have implemented bans, but the variation is around the range of 40 to 80% of reduction in plastic bag use.
Yeah.
Now, the 40 part, right? That's below 50%, but it's still better than the recycling rate, which is 9%. So I mean, this is to us, this is evidence that this is a success. The prevention is better than dealing with the waste after the waste has accumulated.
Tiza, can I ask, when you're in the process of discussing regulations with policymakers, who are your allies and how do you find them?
We work with the environmental agencies of each city. We don't necessarily have access to the top tier, the governor, the mayors, not necessarily on that level. And we find that even working with the bureaucracy, we're able to get somewhere because subnational governments, regional governments in Indonesia do have the bulk of responsibility to deal with waste. So 70% of waste management in Indonesia is actually mandated to regional governments to implement. So it's very much in line with their KPIs and talking to them and saying that this will help your KPIs, this will help you achieve your waste reduction targets gets us in the door every single time. The fact that we're trying to help them achieve targets that they themselves have already set. We find that they're our allies.
So, Tiza, there's 540 something regions. Does that mean you have to replicate this work 540 times?
Hopefully not. We've worked with 6 cities. So that's Banjarmasin. We've worked with Bogor. We've worked with Bandung. We helped Bali and Jakarta with their regulations. And these are kind of big ticket cities. Yeah, they're well recognized, especially Bali and Jakarta. So what happened was a ripple effect, essentially, where once you started getting a number of recognized cities to implement innovative legislation around reducing single-use plastic, preventing single-use plastic, there was a ripple effect where other cities followed suit. We also, facilitated forums where all these cities could get together, talk about successes, challenges, and these forums could be attended by anything from 20 to about 40 cities in one go. And so now we're in a situation where upwards of 40 cities across Indonesia have legislations in place to ban single-use plastic. And that is basically the ripple effect. So hopefully we don't need to go into each and every city, but we do need to continuously facilitate this kind of lesson sharing across cities. That communication is very important.
You're in Bali now, and I'm jealous, so hell. And I seem to recall some video taken by a diver, I think, in Bali of and he was making his way through a cloud of floating plastic rubbish, and that image went viral. How important was that video? And how responsive have policymakers here been to outside pressure? Is it working, or do they get their backs up?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's hard to establish a causal link. Yeah, there's a number of factors, right, that inspire policy making. I can tell you the immediate reaction. I mean, the immediate reaction from there was that video, and then there was once this pronouncement by Professor Jenna Jambek's publication that Indonesia is the second worst contributor to plastic pollution in the ocean. That one was a real stinger for the government because that one was a science journal. The video for Bali, I think, was a stinger for Bali as well. It went viral, and I think in general it hurt the sense of dignity that the government had towards Indonesia's image. Whether or not it led to immediate action is difficult to say. It definitely led to, statements or commitments that, Indonesia is already doing this and that and this and that, Interestingly, the study by... Yeah. Especially with, and you can really see this quite concretely with the study that was published by Jenna Jambek, where the government actually got together and announced, had a series of, focus group discussions with other scientists and other ministries, and came out with a statement that Jenna Jambek's research was flawed because she didn't use this data or that data, So there was a little bit of defensive mode going on. But for civil society organizations, this thing is fuel. These things are, we don't need to wait around for conclusive facts, the strongest data available. Right. Even it's these kinds of things are ammunition for us to start moving and saying, there's pressure. There's not just pressure from outside. There's pressure from inside too. Local civil society organizations have been saying this for years too. So now that, everybody, whoever it is, the, viral videos or CSOs have your attention, or local activists have your attention, whoever it is that grabs the government's attention, they're good to go.
What's the policy that you advocate for single-use plastic then, typically, especially shopping bags? Is it a ban on their use, or a surcharge, a fee, or a combination?
Yeah. In the beginning, the first success that we had with advocacy was when we advocated for a plastic bag charge that was implemented ultimately in 2016 across 27 cities in Indonesia. It started from a petition that I made. And there was a very conscious decision at the time for me to demand for a charge. There was already an understanding that the higher call would be a ban, but I don't know, somehow I felt that wouldn't work, because 8 years ago, nobody was talking about phasing out single-use plastics. If we had started with a ban, it would have met with blank stares. So with a charge, though, there was a very economic argument for that, especially for retailers, right? Look, you get to charge for something that is now costing you, and you get to do it on behalf of the environment. So this is actually logical. So that met with success. The Ministry of Environment picked it up, trialed it in 27 cities, and from then people started talking about the issue nationwide, because suddenly 200 million people were being asked to pay for plastic bags. Whereas initially they thought this was like a freebie, like a facility that consumers should have. And so it triggered a conversation about, oh, why, are we being charged? There were some miscommunications and misunderstandings. Oh, the government's always trying to get money from us and tax us and this and that. But at least a conversation happened and the cities became involved. And immediately after that, we saw one city, Banjarmasin, immediately following up with a ban. So that's exactly what we were going for. And after that, we were able to move on to advocating for a ban because the conversation had already been triggered.
This is a country that really relies on the single-use plastic. I'm thinking of the single-use sachets of laundry detergent, of the drink cups. So there's probably a long way to go. I'm interested in the success that you've had so far with the ban. I think we're in our second year of the ban in Bali. Has there been a noticeable decrease in plastic garbage?
Yes. So the decrease at the point of sales has been about upwards of 40%. And the decrease in the beach cleanups have been 30%. So a 30% noticeable decrease in plastic bags that get collected during beach cleanups. So yes, there is a success, and it's not perfect. It's far from perfect, but it is a significant reduction.
Fantastic.
Tiza, I got to ask you, I've been to places in more remote parts of Indonesia that are beautiful, spectacular places to visit and very peaceful and enjoyable, except for the fact that the beach is just covered, inundated with vast quantities of plastic and garbage. How does that come about? Is that just a function of the currents and the geography of the location in most part, or is it also because of local policies and an absence of any waste management locally?
A lot of them are sachets and styrofoams, and one of the things that we always like to emphasize is that these products there's a brand on them. For sachets, there's a brand on them. For cups and bottles, there's a brand on them. And those brands are multinational FMCG companies. And these FMCG companies don't actually produce sachets in in Western parts of the world. And so there's a double standard in the type of packaging that's being sold by the same company to European countries and to developing countries. With the argument that developing countries need a cheaper price point. But, actually it's not true. If you add up the sachets to the amount that is in a bottle, it actually becomes more expensive than a bottle. And the thing is that sachets can't be recycled and straws can't be recycled. In order for recycling to happen, there has to be a supply chain that reverses the waste. So picks up the waste from where it's consumed and sends it back somehow up the supply chain, at least until it finds a recycler. Yeah. And for Indonesia, that is an archipelago with 17,000 islands, how exactly would you arrange, reverse transportation that picks up the waste from all of these into the closest recycler? Assuming that some products can be recycled like bottles, but for sachets, there's no buyer. There is no buyer of sachets because they cannot be recycled. So who would, in their right mind, spend the money to pick up these sachets from all these islands? And it shouldn't be the government because the government doesn't have that kind of money. So what we're saying is that the companies should be responsible. There has to be extended producer responsibility. And if they can't be responsible, if they can't take the waste back, then they have to redesign their packaging so that they do away with these sachets. They do away with all kinds of single-use plastic that's difficult to recycle. And they make sure that every single packaging that comes out of their factory is able to get picked up, by a market. There's a market for it to be picked up. So yeah, that's the reason why there's so much waste littering our beaches.
One last question on this topic is just, is that the central government's responsibility then to regulate the product packaging? And if so, how does the Widodo cabinet stand in that area?
Yeah, it is the central government's authority and responsibility to regulate extended producer responsibility, and essentially require producers to do something, right? And the Ministry of Environment has issued a regulation that it's called a roadmap for reduction of waste by producers. It's got elements in there like bans of certain single-use plastics that are difficult to recycle. It's got things in there like designing your packaging so that it's bigger than a certain volume. Yeah, so that's meant to prevent like small sachet type packets. But there's also a long timeline. It's like 10 years. So the roadmap is 10 years. A lot of this will only get implemented in 2030. And the other catch is that a lot of this will only be successfully implemented if the Ministry of Industry is fully on board with it, because they're the ones that are holding the licenses for these industries. They're the ones that can actually have provide consequences for for violation of industry licenses. So unfortunately, the Ministry of Industry hasn't been particularly gung-ho about this roadmap. And frankly, I don't see how it's going to be effective if the Ministry of Industry doesn't start acting.
How about the Minister of Tourism?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Ministry of Tourism has already also tried engaging with this discussion. We also did research for them on zero waste tourism and what it looks like. They're able to issue guidelines, but again, they're not able to enforce waste management regulations because it's not their jurisdiction. So there's a little bit of a complexity, or that's an understatement. There's a huge complexity around just figuring out jurisdictions. I don't think it's a secret to you guys that coordination among ministries is a primary challenge for governance here in Indonesia. The answer to your question is that the Ministry of Tourism has a set of guidelines that is aimed at letting hotels know how to manage their waste properly and reduce waste. But they don't necessarily have the jurisdiction and authority to enforce those guidelines.
And it's so important because if you're walking down a beach in Bali and you're wading through effectively other people's garbage, it's not a good look for a tourism industry.
Yeah, it's not a good look at all.
Can I ask about? I know you're focused on consumers and the point of sale, but can I ask about the waste collection process? And I know it's not the solution to the problem because it's better to prevent the waste from happening in the first place. But given that right now, at the moment anyway, the waste is out there, the collection matters too.
I think the key with waste collection, and again, I'm going back to prevention, sorry, is that people need to sort their waste. And the primary solution for people to start sorting their waste is that there has to be a consequence for people who don't sort their waste. Again, I don't want to blame the consumers. I don't want to blame the households. If there are no consequences for you when you combine all your trash together, you combine your plastics and your food waste, then how are people going to really get the message that this is important? And there's a number of ways that this could be enforced. That you could have, you could have the waste not picked up. You could have penalties for mixing your waste, or you could have rewards for separating your waste. There's a number of policy options. But all of these policy options have time and time again been spurned by the government because the existing regulations still place waste management at the household level as a community effort. What it means is that if it's a community effort, then the officers can't come in and enforce that. Because it's not the officers who come and pick the waste. It's the community waste picker that comes in and picks the waste. See, it sounds like stupidly simple, but it's been notoriously difficult to get around this jurisdictional issue. And, it's, I think the key for effective waste collection is that somehow you have to get households to separate their trash. And then you ask about, waste that gets into the rivers. Well, that's kind of, that was a mistake, right? The fact that waste gets into rivers in and of itself is a mistake. And so the trash boons, did you call it boons? I'm not really familiar with the term for it. I think it's like nets, right?
Yeah.
So the nets that are installed, I heard of those. They were piloted in a few canals, and I'm not sure about whether it was consistently applied across every single waterway that flows into the sea. But it's also not just the waste doesn't just come from waterways into the sea. The waste also comes from coastlines. And so even to this day, we find coastlines in Jakarta that are being used as illegal landfills. This is something that I have no answer for at the moment. We're still kind of investigating this just from community, citizen efforts to investigate. I don't know whether the government is aware of this or whether they're aware and they condone it, but it's happening even along Jakarta's coastlines. So I don't think, any kind of solution that is aimed at catching waste from waterways is going to be enough. It's certainly necessary, but it's not going to be enough.
Before you melt, tell us about the documentary, Pulau Plastik. When can we see it? Where can we see it?
Okay, so it's going to be in theaters. So it's time to get over your fears of
not
being
streaming.
in a closed environment with a lot of people. Just wear a mask. For the first part, it's going to be in theaters. Of course, there are talks of it being able to be streamed online after the theater run is over, but I still don't have the details of that. Because it was created as a big cinema film, and it was picked up by a big production house here in Indonesia, it's quite a big deal that the 3 cinema brands in Indonesia are picking it up and going to host the movie in multiple cities across Indonesia. The film is a documentary film that focuses around 3 characters. There's myself, and then there is Prigi, who is a scientist, and there is Robi, who is a rock star in Bali. The story is that Robi, who lives in Bali, travels to Surabaya, where Prigi is, and then travels to Jakarta, where I am, and just, melds with our activities. And the whole thing is not set up. It's like we were just going about our daily activities. It's a pure documentary that follows what we do. In our own ways, with our own backgrounds, right, to solve the single-use plastic issue.
Your own activism.
Yes, in our own activism. So, it shows how Robbie has always been campaigning about the issue in every single rock concert that he does. And Prigi is researching microplastics, and I am always trying to push for community support, public support for regulations that are being planned or regulations that are about to come out. And there's a whole lot of campaigning that needs to be involved in all of this work to show that, look, there's a huge public support for the prevention of single-use plastics. So that's what the movie is about. And you'll see, like, towards the end of the movie, even though it focuses on 3 characters, towards the end of the movie, you'll see just the sheer amount of individuals and organizations that need to be involved and that are involved across Indonesia on this issue.
Everyone should go check out the trailer on YouTube, Pulau Plastik. And we're going to put a link in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us. Really enjoyed this talk.
Thank you for having me.
And we wish you every success.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I hope you get to see the movie.
Well, put on our mask and we'll go out to the... Absolutely. All right. Bye-bye.
Great. Bye. Bye, Jeff. Bye, Kevin.
And that's the pod. Thanks to Tiza Mafira of the Plastic Bag Diet Movement. Our producer is Stephen Handoko. Editing by Aditya Akbar. Music by the Blue Dot Sessions. For a free trial of Kevin's Reformasi Weekly newsletter, go to reformasi.info. As always, you can message us on Instagram at onthelevel_media. Reformasi Dispatch is a production of On the Level Media. I'm Jeff Hutton. Bye for now.